The standard framing of Loughgall treats the evening of 8th May 1987 as something that appeared from nowhere. An intelligence coup materialising in a County Armagh village, 8 IRA men dead, no warning anyone was willing to explain publicly. The intelligence source has never been confirmed. The event reads, in most tellings, like a mystery. A black box that opened and swallowed one of the IRA's most capable units whole. The mystery disappears once you back up 18 months. On the 7th of December 1985, Patrick Kelly, commander of the Provisional IRA's East Tyrone Brigade, led a 2-unit assault on the RUC barracks in Ballygawley, County Tyrone. 2 police officers were killed, the barracks was destroyed. On the 11th of August 1986, the same brigade, same commanding structure, same core personnel, drove a stolen JCB digger with a 200-pound bomb in its front bucket through the perimeter fence of the RUC station at the Birches in County Armagh. The station ceased to exist. Then, on the 8th May 1987, the same unit came for Loughgall with the same vehicle type, the same method, and the same operators, and found 24 SAS soldiers already in position inside and around the building. Loughgall wasn't lightning from a clear sky. It was the 3rd run of a playbook the unit had already demonstrated twice in public, against the same target class with the same approach. British intelligence didn't need a miracle to anticipate the 3rd run. They needed to pay attention to the first 2. The doctrine behind the attacks was specific. Jim Liner had been developing it for years. First intellectually, in the Maze prison, after a December 1973 explosion left him arrested and badly injured. Then operationally, after his release in 1979. Liner was born in April 1956 on the Tully estate in Monaghan town, one of 12 children in the Republic of Ireland. He joined the IRA in the early 1970s, was imprisoned after that premature bomb explosion, and spent approximately 5 years in the Maze reading Mao Zedong's writings on guerrilla warfare. The strategy he absorbed and adapted there was built around a single operational concept: liberated zones. You didn't have to defeat the British Army in direct engagements. You destroyed the physical infrastructure that allowed them to maintain a presence. Isolated police stations, remote barracks, facilities that could be rendered rubble. And then you threatened or killed any contractor who arrived to rebuild them, making the cost of restoration prohibitive rather than merely expensive. From 1979 onward, after his release, Liner held a seat on Monaghan Urban District Council as a Sinn Féin representative, an elected public official in the Irish Republic, attending council meetings, representing constituents, fulfilling the ordinary obligations of local government. He still held that seat on the 8th May 1987 when he was killed in County Armagh. Military sources recorded his title as Councillor Jim Liner, the word sitting directly beside IRA Commander in the same line. The Royal Ulster Constabulary, who had given him the internal designation the Executioner, would have found the duality unsurprising. He had been arrested and interrogated repeatedly by the Garda Síochána across the border without ever being charged. He was living in a flat on Dublin Street in Monaghan at the time of his death. Councillor and commander occupied the same person simultaneously, in the same body, at the same address. The council seat wasn't a cover story. Sinn Féin's political strategy under Gerry Adams had been explicitly built around simultaneous ballot box and armed campaign activity. Liner was, in this sense, the doctrine made flesh. From 1984, Liner worked closely with Padraig McKierney, born in December 1954 in Moy, County Tyrone, with a long IRA career behind him by the time of Loughgall. McKierney's record was extensive, multiple convictions, multiple prison terms across the preceding decade, and then, in September 1983, he was among 38 men who escaped from the Maze prison in the largest mass breakout in British penal history. He rejoined IRA activity in East Tyrone at the beginning of 1984 and immediately began advocating what he called the third phase of the armed struggle, the strategic defensive, in which the RUC, Ulster Defence Regiment and British Army would be denied all support in selected areas through repeated, escalating attacks on their bases. PBS Frontline later described him as one of the most experienced and dangerous men in the IRA. McKierney had come from a Republican family where two brothers had also been imprisoned. One nearly died on hunger strike, and two relatives, brother Kevin and uncle Jack, had been murdered by loyalist paramilitaries in sectarian reprisals against the family. He brought to the East Tyrone Brigade something harder than ideology, a personal ledger. Patrick Kelly took command of the East Tyrone Brigade in 1985 and immediately began converting doctrine into operational tempo. Born in Carrickfergus in March 1957, Kelly had been an IRA member since the early 1970s and had survived one prosecution, charged and released when the evidence failed to support a conviction. Under his leadership, as one contemporary account puts it, the East Tyrone Brigade becomes the most active IRA unit. By 1986, when the IRA's Army Convention took up the debate over dropping abstentionism under pressure from Gerry Adams, Kelly was firmly among the internal hardliners, the faction most committed to continued armed campaign, most resistant to any direction that prioritised politics over operations. The unit he commanded reflected that commitment in every way. The target class the brigade concentrated on was deliberate rather than opportunistic. Rural part-time RUC stations in South Tyrone and North Armagh. Small, isolated, staffed for predictable windows of a few hours morning and evening, perimeter fencing erected not against vehicles but against grenades and mortars. Unrubble the fence with something heavy enough and the bomb arrives inside the perimeter already mounted on the delivery vehicle. Over 18 months in the mid-1980s, the East Tyrone Brigade attacked and bombed facilities across the region: Ballygawley, Tynan, the Birches, Coal Island, Dungannon, Carrickmore and others. The fencing was the tactical problem. High-wire perimeters built specifically to stop mortar rounds and grenades. The solution was a vehicle that drove through the fence with the bomb already aboard. 7th of December 1985, Ballygawley, County Tyrone. Saturday evening, just before 7 o'clock. The RUC barracks at Ballygawley wasn't a formidable target. 5 constables, a shift change imminent. The kind of small-town police station that exists in any rural district. Familiar, local, part of the texture of an ordinary village Saturday. The officers inside were preparing the handover from one shift to the next when the East Tyrone Brigade's 2 active service units arrived. The assault team was positioned before the building showed any sign of alarm. One volunteer took a concealed position near the front gate. When Constable George Gilliland and Reserve Constable William Clements opened that gate, a routine act, the same routine act at the same time every Saturday, the volunteer stepped forward and shot them both dead at close range. Gilliland was 34 years old, Clements was 52, both killed before the attack proper had fully begun. The assault team then opened up with AK-47 and Armalite rifles, raking the front of the building with automatic fire. 3 other officers who had been inside ran out the back, putting the wall between themselves and the incoming fire. IRA members entered the building and took documents and weapons. Among what they removed was Clements's Ruger Security 6 revolver, taken from the body of the man they had just shot dead at the gate. A 100-pound bomb, roughly 45 kilograms, was placed inside the building and detonated after the unit withdrew. The detonation wasn't symbolic. The entire barracks ceased to exist as a functional structure. Royal Engineers had to rebuild it from scratch the following year. 3 other officers were wounded, no IRA casualties. The unit exited cleanly. Patrick Kelly commanded both the assault unit and the bomb unit that evening. The broader brigade infrastructure, including Jim Liner, whose strategic doctrine had laid the groundwork for this type of operation and who was deeply embedded in the East Tyrone command structure, was part of the force that executed this campaign. The specific method at Ballygawley was a coordinated gun and bomb assault. Armed entry, fire suppression, hand-placed device, total destruction. The digger-mounted bomb didn't arrive until the next operation. But the strategic template was fully formed. Isolated rural station, evening shift change, combined arms, enough explosive to make the site permanently useless. One detail quietly connected Ballygawley to everything that followed. The Ruger taken from Reserve Constable Clements that evening wasn't discarded. It was carried through the unit's operations across the following 17 months. It would be recovered by security forces on the ground at Loughgall in May 1987, still in the possession of the same East Tyrone formation, the same weapon, traced across both ends of the sequence. 11th August 1986. The Birches, County Armagh. Late summer, still light. The small RUC station near Portadown had been built to withstand the kind of attacks it had previously faced. High-wire perimeter fencing constructed specifically to defeat grenades and mortar rounds. The East Tyrone Brigade had studied the problem and arrived at an answer that the fence's designers hadn't fully anticipated. You don't throw something over it, you drive something through it. The operation involved substantial forces, an armed gun team, a digger crew, a diversionary unit staged at Pomeroy, and multiple getaway vehicles, which gives some indication of how seriously Kelly and the brigade command were taking a station that, on the night of the attack, was empty. The preparatory moves began in the afternoon. A diversionary bomb attack was staged first at Pomeroy RUC station in County Tyrone, a deliberate false alarm designed to pull security force units toward Pomeroy and away from the Birches. A JCB digger and a set of getaway vehicles were hijacked at Washing Bay, roughly the same time frame. The digger's front bucket had been prepared to carry the bomb. 200 pounds of explosive, double the Ballygawley device, packed into a container and wired to a fuse. This wasn't an improvisation. Every element had been thought through. The armed team arrived at the Birches first, approaching through the growing evening light, and raked the station with automatic fire. There was no one inside to kill. The station was unmanned, and the gunfire was suppression fire, establishing control of the approach. Then the digger came. Declan Arthurs, 20 years old, from Galbally in County Tyrone, experienced operating heavy farm machinery from years working on his family's land, drove the JCB toward the perimeter fence with measured deliberateness. The high-wire barrier that had been designed to stop grenades and mortars offered no meaningful resistance to several tons of moving machinery. It went through. The bomb in the bucket was now inside the perimeter. A volunteer lit the fuse. The unit retreated to waiting vehicles and moved out. The bomb detonated with enough force to destroy most of the station building and blow the roof completely off a pub across the road. 7 civilians in the immediate area sustained minor injuries, none fatal, none serious. No RUC officers were killed because none were present. The unit escaped across Lough Neagh by boat, evading the security force roadblocks that were going up on the road network in the aftermath. The diversionary attack at Pomeroy had worked as intended, buying the extra time they needed. Patrick Kelly commanded the operation as East Tyrone Brigade OC. Jim Liner and Padraig McKerney were involved in the operation. Arthurs, who would appear again at the controls of a digger 9 months later, had made himself the obvious choice for any operation requiring that particular skill. A young man whose farm background happened to align precisely with the unit's most effective tactical innovation. Multiple analytical accounts of the period describe the Birches as having established the repeatable playbook that was applied at Loughgall. The descriptions aren't generous. They are accurate. The Loughgall method isn't similar to what happened at the Birches. It's the same method, with the same personnel, against the same target class. Rural part-time station, evening attack window, armed gun team establishing fire while a vehicle-mounted bomb is driven through the fence. Station destroyed, unit withdraws. The IRA had now demonstrated this approach twice, once at a staffed station, once at an empty one. The next station on the list was Loughgall. When they planned it, they expected no resistance for the same reason there had been no resistance at the Birches. The target was a small, isolated, part-time station, and if the timing was right, the officers would be dead or gone before any response was organised. The stated aim of the operation, as one survivor later recalled, was direct: to get in before the officers left, to take them out. After the Birches, the question for British security forces wasn't whether the East Tyrone Brigade would attempt a third rural station attack. The method had been tested and proven across 2 operations. The unit had the capability and had demonstrated the willingness to repeat it. The specific operational question, which station, on what date, required precise intelligence. But the target class was no longer ambiguous. What is publicly confirmed through the European Court of Human Rights judgment is this. Operation Judy involved 24 SAS soldiers and 3 RUC officers being pre-positioned at Loughgall Station in the early hours of 8th May 1987, following a briefing that an attack was likely that day. The ECHR document is unambiguous. Those soldiers and officers were in position inside and around the building before the East Tyrone Brigade unit had even stolen its vehicles that morning. How the specific day and location became known has never been formally declassified. Mark Urban's Big Boys Rules, published in 1992 and still the most careful journalistic account of covert operations against the IRA during that period, accepted that advance intelligence allowed the ambush, but declined to name a single definitive source, presenting the picture as a convergence of surveillance, human intelligence, and signals monitoring, rather than a single clean tip. A 2017 account, published by a British Army intelligence figure, claimed the plot was detected through physical surveillance of a known IRA operator who was observed casing construction sites, looking for a digger to steal. Tradecraft awareness rather than penetration of the unit itself. RUC Covert Unit E4A appears in multiple secondary accounts as having located the stolen digger in the days before the attack. When civil case proceedings related to Loughgall required the police to disclose relevant documents, they told a court that compliance would require examining nearly 10 million intelligence records. That figure isn't a bureaucratic formality. It reflects the density of surveillance that British security forces had maintained against East Tyrone over the preceding years. Electronic, physical, and human. Whether the specific trigger for the 8th May preposition was E4A surveillance of the hijacked JCB, signals intelligence tracking communications around the operation, a human source inside or adjacent to the unit, or some combination of all three, has never been officially confirmed and is likely to remain unresolved. What can be stated plainly is that by early May 1987, British intelligence held an operational template with a high level of specificity. Rural part-time RUC stations, evening hour attacks, an armed van team combined with a digger-mounted bomb breaching the perimeter fence. The same East Tyrone Brigade personnel, the same approach. When a JCB fitting the known method was stolen in the area, combined with reports of a hijacked Toyota van, those weren't ambiguous indicators. The pattern the unit had established was functioning as its own operational signature. The IRA subsequently devoted years to internally investigating how Loughgall was compromised. They never definitively identified anyone against whom they were prepared to act. Some accounts suggest that if a penetration agent was among the attacking group, he was killed in the firefight, meaning the investigation was looking for someone who was already dead. That uncertainty, unresolved within the Republican movement itself, is part of why the controversy has persisted for nearly 4 decades. 8th May 1987, Loughgall, County Armagh. The station opens its evening window at 1700. It's staffed by 3 local RUC officers, due to close at 1900. A routine Friday evening in a small Protestant village in South Armagh, apple orchards and farmland, the kind of place where, before the Troubles, nothing of particular note happened. 2 additional RUC headquarters mobile support unit officers have been placed in the station for this evening's closing, supplementing the local officer carrying out normal operations. Inside the building, 6 SAS soldiers in plain clothes are positioned with the constables. Concealed at 5 locations in the wooded grounds surrounding the building, behind walls, in hedgerows, in the trees on the far side of the playing field, are 18 more SAS soldiers. The operation is codenamed Operation Judy. 24 soldiers and 3 officers, all in position since the early hours of the morning, having briefed through the night that an attack was expected that day. Across the area, hours earlier, the unit had assembled its materials. A blue Toyota Hi-Ace van was stolen by masked men from a business in Dungannon, taken in the hours before the operation, not days before, which speaks to a unit keeping its exposure window as narrow as possible. At roughly the same time, a JCB digger was taken from a farm at Lislasley Road, approximately 2 miles west of Loughgall. 2 IRA members remained at that farm to prevent the owners calling the security forces. The bomb itself, 300 to 400 pounds of explosive packed into an oil drum, partially concealed by rubble, wired to 2 40-second fuses, had been brought to the area the day before, transported by boat across Lough Neagh from Ardbow to Maggery, specifically to avoid the vehicle checkpoints on the road network. The unit had navigated around exactly the kind of security measure that should have intercepted them. Everything was in place. 8 men. Coveralls, boiler suits, the same style worn by workmen across any rural county. Balaclavas, bulletproof vests beneath the coveralls, surgical gloves, heavy socks pulled over their shoes to prevent footwear impressions being recovered for forensic analysis. They had thought through the forensics of capture, even as they drove toward a station they expected to take by surprise. The van carried Patrick Kelly in the passenger seat and Jim Liner, the sitting councillor, the architect, in the rear, alongside Padraig McKinney and Seamus Donnelly. Eugene Kelly drove. On the digger, Declan Arthurs at the controls, Tony Gormley and Gerard O'Callaghan aboard, armed, lighter in hand. They arrived in Loughgall from the northeast shortly after 1900, when the station was scheduled to close. The van and the digger made 2 slow passes along the road in front of the station, past the building, turning around, past again. The building appeared quiet. No visible movement where the evening shift should have been finishing. No lights in particular. no activity. The station looked empty, or nearly so. Something about that quietness struck several members of the unit as wrong. A debate began inside the van. Pull back, abort, come back another day. The station wasn't behaving the way a live station should be behaving. Some felt it, that the stillness was too complete. Kelly made the decision to proceed. They had come this far. They had the bomb in the bucket. They were going in. At around 1915, Arthurs turned the digger toward the perimeter gate and accelerated. Gormley and O'Callaghan held rifles. Patrick Kelly jumped from the passenger seat of the van before it had fully stopped and immediately opened fire on the station building with automatic weapons, either to signal commitment or because this was how the previous attacks had begun, or both. The van stopped just ahead. The other men piled out. Inside the station, and in the concealed positions surrounding it, the SAS had been watching since the unit's vehicles made their first pass. They waited. They let the digger breach the perimeter. They waited for the bomb to be inside the wire. The digger crashed through the light security fence. The fence that had been built to stop grenades and mortars offered no resistance worth noting. Arthurs lit both 40-second fuses and then ran. The oil drum bomb sat in the bucket, its 2 fuses burning down. The SAS opened fire. From inside the station, M16 rifles, H&K G3 rifles, 2 L7A2 general-purpose machine guns in the concealed positions. From 5 directions simultaneously, covering the ground around the vehicles in a prepared kill zone. The fusillade was immediate and overwhelming. 600 spent British cartridge cases were later recovered from the scene. The bodywork of the van sustained approximately 125 bullet holes. The attacking force collectively fired 78 rounds. The bomb detonated while the firefight was still running, destroying the digger and severely damaging the station building, injuring both HMSU officers inside with the blast and wounding one SAS soldier when glass from a window shattered across his face. The concussion moved through Loughgall village. Villagers who had not been informed of the operation, evacuating anyone would have alerted the IRA, took shelter where they could find it. It was over in 3 to 4 minutes. Every member of the 8-man attacking force was dead. All had multiple gunshot wounds. All had been hit in the head. Declan Arthurs was found in a laneway beside the Loughgall FC premises, several dozen yards from the fence. Unarmed at the moment of his death, the cigarette lighter he had used to ignite the fuses still clenched in his right hand. One of the photographs taken in the aftermath shows the lighter clearly. He was 21 years old. Gerard O'Callaghan was also found unarmed, one of 2 members of the attacking force who had carried no weapon into the operation itself, apparently relying on the armed members of the group. 3 members of the unit had been riding in scout cars outside the immediate kill zone. They drove away, passed through the British Army and RUC checkpoints that went up across the area in the minutes following the contact, and got through without being stopped. One of them, in an account later recorded by HistoryNet, described turning back toward the station and seeing what remained. I knew they were wiped out at the time. I could see the carnage down at the van. The Historical Inquiries team reviewed the incident in December 2011 and found that members of the IRA unit had opened fire first as they approached the station. It concluded that the unit couldn't have been safely arrested given the circumstances, and that the SAS were justified in responding with lethal force. The IRA's own statement in the immediate aftermath had asserted that volunteers who escaped the ambush saw other volunteers being shot on the ground after being captured. The British government disputed this and maintained that the use of force was lawful throughout. The ECHR, in its 2001 judgment, found it couldn't conclude the killings were unlawful, but held that the British government had violated the right to life by failing to conduct a properly independent investigation into the deaths. In 2017, documents declassified from the National Archives of Ireland revealed that British government ballistic testing linked the weapons recovered at Loughgall to between 40 and 50 killings, including every security force fatality in counties Fermanagh and Tyrone in 1987, before the ambush date. Among the 8 weapons recovered, 3 H&K G3 rifles, 1 FN-FAL, 2 FN-FNC rifles, a Franke Spaz 12 shotgun, and the Ruger Security 6 that had been taken from Reserve Constable William Clements at the gate of Ballygawley barracks on the 7th of December 1985. The same gun, carried through 17 months of operations by the same unit, and recovered at the third site in the sequence. The 8 men killed at Loughgall on the 8th of May 1987, Patrick Joseph Kelly, age 30, East Tyrone Brigade Commander. Jim Liner, age 31, sitting Sinn Féin councillor for Monaghan Urban District Council. Padraig McKerney, age 32, Maze escaper. Declan Arthurs, age 21, lighter in hand. Seamus Donnelly, age 19. Michael Anthony Gormley, Tony, age 25. Eugene Kelly, age 25. Gerard O'Callaghan, age 29. It was the largest single loss of life suffered by the Provisional IRA in any one engagement during the Troubles. No contact during the conflict killed as many members of the organisation in a single incident. At Cogue in 1991, 3 IRA members were killed by the SAS. At Clonaux in 1992, 4. Nothing approached 8. The funerals drew thousands, the largest Republican gatherings in Northern Ireland since the 1981 hunger strikers. Gerry Adams at Liner's graveside delivered an oration. The British government, he said, does not understand the Jim Liners, the Padraig McKerneys, or the Seamus McIlwains. It thinks it can defeat them. It never will. In Portadown, a few miles from Marne Road Barracks, where the SAS unit had debriefed after the operation, someone painted SAS 8 IRA 0 on the roof of a derelict house overlooking the Belfast to Dublin railway line. The Guardian reported, 15 years later, that the graffiti was still there. There was one other person at Loughgall that evening who had nothing to do with any of this. Anthony Hughes was 36 years old, from Caledon in County Tyrone. Catholic, married, 3 children, an auto repairman. He and his brother Oliver had spent the day working on a lorry and were driving home in a white Citroën GS when their road took them into Loughgall village. The firefight was already underway. Both brothers were wearing blue coveralls, the same shade, the same style as those worn by the IRA team. They drove into the scene approximately 130 yards from the station, approaching from behind the advancing SAS cut-off group. Soldiers opened fire on the Citroën from behind. Anthony was struck multiple times in the head. The car took approximately 34 bullet holes. He died of his wounds. Oliver was shot 14 times and survived, though he was badly wounded and would carry the injuries permanently. The British government issued a full apology to the Hughes family in March 2014, confirming that Anthony and Oliver were wholly innocent of any wrongdoing. The European Court of Human Rights had already confirmed years earlier that Anthony Hughes was a civilian entirely unconnected with the attacking force. The 9 deaths at Loughgall are sometimes discussed as though the civilian death and the deaths of the 8 armed men occupy the same moral register. They don't. 8 people arrived at Loughgall that evening wearing body armour and carrying firearms, with a 300 to 400 pound bomb mounted on a vehicle, intending to kill police officers at a manned station. One person was driving home from a repair job and turned into the wrong road at the wrong moment. Both things happened in the same village on the same evening. That is where their proximity ends. Anthony Hughes deserves to be named clearly and separately, not absorbed into a reckoning about the unit that killed him. The controversy over Loughgall has persisted for nearly 4 decades because it sits at the intersection of several unresolved questions that legitimate institutions haven't yet fully answered. The informer question remains officially open. The IRA spent years internally investigating how the operation was compromised. They never conclusively identified anyone. Allegations connecting Freddie Scappaticci, the British agent known as Steak Knife, who led the IRA's own internal security apparatus and who was therefore positioned to suppress any investigation into precisely this kind of compromise, to Loughgall, have circulated across Republican accounts and in subsequent media coverage. Those allegations remain unconfirmed. Scappaticci denied specific involvement in Loughgall before his death in 2023. The police disclosure figures in the civil proceedings, that examining the relevant intelligence would require processing nearly 10 million documents, give some sense of why full transparency hasn't been achieved, and why it may not be achievable in any form that the affected families would accept. The Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act of 2023 halted the Loughgall inquest that had been moving toward a substantive hearing. As of March 2025, the Secretary of State had publicly reaffirmed a commitment to its restoration. What that inquest, when it ultimately runs, would be required to address isn't primarily what happened inside the kill zone on the night. That record is reasonably established and unlikely to be substantially revised. The harder questions are about how the intelligence picture developed, who held what information and when, what decisions were made about the form of the response rather than an arrest operation, and whether those decisions satisfied the legal standard for necessity and proportionality. Those questions remain officially unanswered. The SAS soldiers who operated at Loughgall on 8th of May 1987 have never been named in any document the British government has released publicly. At the 1995 inquest, they didn't give evidence. Their statements were read into the record. The ECHR judgment treats them generically. No declassified file names them. This is standard institutional practice for covert operations, not a concealment specific to Loughgall. Their names aren't needed to understand what happened or why. The sequence was Ballygawley, then the Birches, then Loughgall. The same brigade, the same commanding structure. Kelly throughout all three, Liner and McKerney deeply embedded in the campaign, Arthurs at the digger controls at the Birches and at the final station. The same target class, rural, part-time, isolated, evening hour exposure. The same strategic logic. Armed assault followed by enough explosive to make the station permanently unusable. And from the Birches onward, the same tactical signature. Armed team establishing fire while a vehicle-mounted bomb breaches the perimeter fence. The same weapons in at least one documented case, including the Ruger recovered at Loughgall that had been lifted from a dead constable at Ballygawley 17 months earlier. The same unit carrying the same pistol through the same campaign until the day it ended. By the time the blue Toyota Hiace made its first slow reconnaissance pass in front of Loughgall station on the evening of 8th May, 24 soldiers had been in concealed positions since before dawn. They were there because British intelligence, through surveillance of stolen vehicles, through signals collection, through whatever human sources were in play, through 18 months of watching the same unit run the same method, had enough forewarning to pre-position against the third strike before the unit's vehicles had even been hijacked that morning. The unit, arriving after 7 o'clock, noticed that something felt wrong. The station was too quiet. They debated aborting. The thing that felt wrong was the silence of a building whose occupants had been expecting them. They went in anyway. The hat-trick wasn't a mystery. The East Tyrone Brigade wrote its operational signature across 2 prior attacks and then arrived at a 3rd rural station, expecting no resistance. The force already in position had seen the playbook twice. They had built a kill zone, positioned it correctly, and waited for the 3rd run to arrive. It did. Subscribe for more stories like this.